Welcome to Sleepless Philosophers. Before the ideas begin, a small request: most of you who watch are not subscribed, and we've noticed this in the numbers, in the gap between views and the audience that stays. We post every single day, we put care into each script, each thought, each question that unfolds in the dark, and if these videos have become part of your nights, if they help you think or drift, or simply exist in that space between waking and sleep, consider subscribing, hitting the like button, turning on notifications so you know when the next one arrives. And if you feel moved to do so, leave a comment, tell us where you're watching from. What philosophical question occupies your mind the most? What idea you return to when everything else falls away? These small gestures matter more than you might think. They allow this work to continue. They allow these ideas to reach others like you, scattered across the world, awake in the quiet hours. Now the introduction ends and the philosophy begins. The face is unknown, is never seen directly, is accessible only through reflection, through surfaces that show what cannot be seen from the position of seeing. And this mediation is so fundamental, so early, so constant in modern life that it becomes invisible, becomes assumed, becomes the unnoticed foundation of self-recognition, of the sense that there is a self, that this self has a face, that the face is mine, is me, is the visible representation of what I am. But the representation requires the mirror, requires the surface, requires the external reflection that shows what the eyes cannot see, cannot access, cannot know without mediation. And the mediation is what the experiment removed, is what the conditions eliminated, is what the children grew without. And the growing without mirrors, without reflective surfaces, without any way to see themselves, produced children who at age 5, at age 7, at age 10, could not recognize themselves in photographs, could not identify their faces in videos, could not point to themselves in group pictures, could not distinguish their own image from the images of others. And the others were recognized, were identified, were known by face, but the self was not, was absent from visual recognition, was not integrated into the sense of identity, was not part of what it meant to be oneself. And oneself was different for these children, was not anchored in appearance, was not attached to face, was not incorporating the visual self that mirrors create, that reflections provide, that external mediation makes available. And the available is what was withheld, is what the experiment denied, is what created the conditions where self-recognition could not develop, where the face remained unknown, where identity formed without the visual component that is considered essential, that is assumed to be natural, that is treated as automatic, but is really learned, is acquired, is the result of repeated exposure to reflection, to the surfaces that show the face, that make the self visible, that create the connection between the feeling of being and the image of appearing. And the appearing is what these children never saw, never knew, never integrated into identity. And identity was therefore different, was organized around other features, around voice, around proprioception, around the feeling of being in a body without the visual confirmation, without the external validation, without the reflection that says this is what you look like, this is your face, this is who you are. And the R was not visual, was not based on appearance, was not incorporating the face as part of self. And the self was coherent, was stable, was functioning, was not damaged or diminished, but was different, was showing that the visual self is not necessary, is not essential, is not the foundation of identity, but is one component, is one way of knowing oneself, is the way that cultures with mirrors create, that societies with reflective surfaces enforce, that modernity assumes to be universal, but is really contingent, is really dependent on technology, on the availability of surfaces that reflect. And the reflecting is recent, is not ancient, is not something that most humans, for most of history, had access to in the form that is now constant, now ubiquitous, now shaping identity from infancy, From the earliest moments, when the child sees the face in the mirror and begins the process of recognition, of connecting the image to the self, of incorporating the visual into identity. And the incorporating is learned, is not automatic, is not innate, is requiring repeated exposure, repeated confirmation, repeated pairing of the feeling of being with the image of appearing. And the pairing is what creates self-recognition, is what makes the face feel like mine, is what integrates the visual self into the sense of identity. And the identity that forms without this pairing is different, is not including the face, is not based on appearance, is not recognizing the self in images. And the images are what the experiment tested, is what revealed the absence, is what showed that these children could not identify themselves, could not see themselves, could not recognize the face that was theirs because the face had never been known, had never been seen, had never been integrated into the sense of who they were. And who they were was stable, was coherent, was not fragmented or confused, except in the specific domain of visual self-recognition. And the recognition was absent, was not developed, was not present, and the presence of self was therefore different, was not including the visual component, was not based on the face, was organized around other features, other ways of knowing, other modes of self-awareness, and the awareness was intact, was functional, was demonstrating that the self does not require the visual, does not need the face, does not depend on mirrors. And mirrors are what create the visual self, are what make the face known, are what integrate appearance into identity. And the integration is what was missing, is what the experiment prevented, is what the conditions eliminated. And the elimination revealed something fundamental about selfhood, about identity, about the role of reflection in creating the sense of being a person, of having a face, of being recognizable. And the recognizable is what these children were not. Were not to themselves, were not in images, were not in photographs or videos or any visual representation. And the representation is what others used, is what others relied on, is what the culture assumed to be universal, to be automatic, to be the natural way of identifying people. But the natural was shown to be cultural, was shown to be learned, was shown to be dependent on mirrors, on reflections, on the external surfaces that show the face and create the connection between image and self. And the self without this connection is different, is not including the visual, is not based on appearance, is not recognizing itself in mirrors. And mirrors are what the children were eventually shown, is what was introduced after years of deprivation, after identity had formed without reflection, and the formation was complete, was stable, was not including the expectation of seeing oneself, was not anticipating recognition. And so when the mirror was presented, when the reflection appeared, the children did not recognize themselves, did not see themselves, saw instead a stranger, saw another person, saw someone who was not them. And the not them was what the face was, is what the image was, is what the reflection showed. And the showing was not connecting, was not integrating, was not creating recognition, because the foundation had not been laid, the pairing had not occurred, the repeated exposure had not happened. And so the face remained unknown, remained other, remained someone else's face, and whose face was a question they could not answer, could not determine, could not figure out through observation, because observation alone is not sufficient, is not creating recognition, is requiring the pairing, the connection, the learned association between feeling and image, between being and appearing. And the appearing was not theirs, was not them, was not integrated into identity. And identity was therefore split, was separated between the felt self and the visual self, between who they knew themselves to be and who they appeared to be. And the appearing was stranger, was other, was not recognized. And recognition is what mirrors create, is what reflection develops, is what repeated exposure produces. But the exposure had not occurred, the development had not happened, the recognition was not present, and the present was strange, was disorienting, was revealing that the face is not naturally known, is not automatically recognized, is not inherently connected to self, but is learned, is acquired, is the result of cultural practice, of technological mediation, of the availability of mirrors. And mirrors are recent, are modern, are not something that most humans throughout history had in the form that is now constant. And the constant is what creates recognition, is what integrates the face, is what makes the visual self part of identity. An identity without this integration is different, is not based on appearance, is not including the face, is organized around other features. And the features are sufficient, are adequate, are creating stable selfhood without the visual component. And the component is what the experiment removed, is what the conditions eliminated, is what revealed the contingency of self-recognition, the learned nature of face identity, the cultural foundation of the visual self. And the self that forms without mirrors is coherent, is functional, is demonstrating that appearance is not essential to selfhood, that the face is not necessary for identity, that recognition is not natural, but is learned, is acquired, is the product of reflection, of mediation, of the external surfaces that show what cannot be seen directly, and the directly is what the children knew themselves, is how they experienced being, is the proprioceptive, the auditory, the tactile, the ways of knowing that do not require reflection, that do not depend on mirrors, that are available without mediation. And the mediation is what the visual requires, is what the face needs, is what makes self-recognition possible, and the possible is what the experiment showed to be contingent, to be cultural, to be the result of. Conditions that can be present or absent, and the absence creates different selves, creates identities without faces, creates children who know themselves but do not recognize themselves, who are themselves but do not appear to be themselves, who exist as subjects but not as visual objects. And the objects are what mirrors create, are what reflections produce, are what the external mediation makes available, and the available is what these children lacked, is what the experiment withheld, is what created the conditions where self-recognition could not develop, where the face remained unknown, where identity formed without the visual self, and the self was complete, was intact, was not diminished but was different, was showing that the mirror is not reflecting what is there but is creating what is recognized, is producing the visual self, is making the face part of identity, and identity is flexible, is variable, is forming around whatever is available, whatever is provided, whatever is repeated enough to become integrated. And the integrated is what the visual self is in normal conditions, is what the face becomes through reflection, is what mirrors produce. But the production is not automatic, is not guaranteed, is not happening without the conditions, without the exposure, without the repeated pairing that creates recognition. And recognition is what makes the face mine, is what integrates appearance into identity, is what connects the image to the self. And the connection is learned, is cultural, is showing that selfhood is not given but is made, is not discovered but is constructed, is not natural but is the product of specific conditions, specific technologies, specific cultural practices, and the practices include mirrors, include reflections, include the constant availability of surfaces that show the face, and the face is what becomes known through showing, is what becomes self through reflection, is what becomes mine through recognition, and recognition requires mirrors, requires surfaces, requires the external mediation that these children lacked, that the experiment withheld, that created the conditions where identity formed without the visual self, where the face remained other, where self-recognition was absent, and the absence was revealing, was demonstrating, was showing that the self is not what it seems, is not naturally visual, is not automatically including the face, but is constructed through reflection, through mediation, through the mirrors that create the visual self, that integrate appearance into identity, that make recognition possible. And the possible is what these children lacked, is what the experiment removed, is what revealed that the face is not naturally known, that self-recognition is not automatic, that identity requires reflection, requires mirrors, requires the external surfaces that show what cannot be seen directly, and the directly is what matters, is what is felt, is what is known without mediation. And the mediation is what creates the visual, is what produces the face, is what makes self-recognition possible. And the possible is contingent, is cultural, is the product of mirrors, of reflections, of the external mediation that shows the face and creates the connection. And the connection is what these children lacked, is what the experiment prevented, is what revealed that selfhood is learned, that identity is constructed, that the face is not naturally part of self, but is integrated through reflection, through mirrors, through the mediated surfaces that show what the eyes cannot see, and the seeing is what creates recognition, is what produces the visual self, is what makes the face mine, and mine is what the face was not for these children, was not in images, was not in reflections, was not recognized because recognition requires mirrors, requires reflection, requires the external mediation that creates the visual self, that integrates appearance into identity, that makes selfhood include the face. And the face is what these children never knew, never saw, never recognized. And the recognizing is what mirrors do, is what reflection creates, is what the experiment showed to be learned, to be cultural, to be contingent on conditions that can be present or absent. And the absence creates different selves, creates identities without faces, creates children who are themselves but do not know themselves visually, who exist but do not recognize themselves, who have faces but have never seen them. And the seeing is what makes the face part of self, is what creates recognition, is what mirrors produce, and mirrors are what the children lacked, are what the experiment withheld, are what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, requires mediation, requires the surfaces that show the face and create the visual self, and the self that forms without this reflection is different, is not including appearance, is not based on face, is organized around other ways of knowing, other modes of awareness, and the awareness is sufficient, is creating stable identity, is demonstrating that the visual self is not essential, is not necessary, is not the foundation of selfhood, but is one component, one way of knowing, one mode of recognition. And recognition is what mirrors create, is what reflection produces, is what these children lacked, and the lacking revealed that selfhood is learned, that identity is constructed, that the face is not naturally part of self, but becomes part through reflection, through mirrors, through the external mediation that shows what cannot be seen directly. And the directly is what the children knew, is how they existed, is the selfhood without the visual. And the visual is what requires mirrors, requires reflection, requires the external surfaces that create recognition, that integrate appearance, that make the face part of identity, and identity is what forms without mirrors. When mirrors are absent, when reflection is unavailable, when the conditions prevent the development of visual self-recognition, and the recognition is absent, is not developed, is showing that the self does not require the face, that identity does not need appearance, that selfhood can form without the visual component, and the component is what mirrors create, is what reflection produces, is what the experiment showed to be contingent, to be learned, to be the product of external mediation. And mediation is what creates the visual self, what integrates the face, what makes self-recognition possible. And the possible is what these children lacked, is what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, requires mirrors, requires the surfaces that show the face, and create the connection between image and self. And the connection is learned, is cultural, is not automatic, is not natural, is the product of repeated exposure to reflection, to the mirrors that make the face known, that integrate appearance into identity, that create the visual self, and the self without this integration is different, is coherent, is stable, is demonstrating that selfhood is flexible, is constructed, is forming around whatever is available, and what was available to these children was everything except mirrors, except reflection, except the visual self. And the visual self is what requires external mediation, what depends on mirrors, what these children never developed because they never saw themselves, never knew their faces, never recognized themselves in images, and the images are what others use to identify them, what the culture assumes to be natural, what the experiment showed to be learned, to be cultural, to be contingent on mirrors, on reflection, on the external surfaces that create the visual self, that integrate appearance into identity, that make self-recognition possible. And the possible is what the experiment removed, is what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, that the face is not naturally known, that self-recognition is learned, is cultural, is the product of mirrors, and mirrors are what create the visual self, what make the face part of identity, what these children lacked and the lacking revealed. That selfhood without mirrors is different, is possible, is coherent, is demonstrating that the self does not require reflection to exist, only to be recognized visually. And visual recognition is what mirrors create, what these children never achieved, what the experiment showed to be contingent, cultural, learned, and learned is what self-recognition is, what the face becomes, what identity includes when mirrors are present, when reflection is available, when external mediation creates the visual self, and the self is what these children had without it, is what formed differently, is what demonstrated that identity formation requires external reflection only if visual self-recognition is the goal. And the goal is cultural, is modern, is contingent on mirrors. And mirrors are what these children lacked, are what the experiment removed, are what revealed that selfhood is flexible, is constructed, is formed around whatever is reflected back. And what was reflected back was nothing, was absence, was the lack of visual self, and the lack created different identity, created selfhood without face, created children who couldn't recognize themselves, because identity formation requires external reflection, requires mirrors, requires the surfaces that show the face and create the visual self, and the visual self is what these children never developed, never knew, never integrated into identity, and identity was different, was complete, was demonstrating that the self does not require the face to be the self, only to recognize the self visually. And visual recognition requires mirrors, requires reflection, requires external mediation, and mediation is what the experiment removed, is what revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, that selfhood includes the face only when mirrors are present, that self-recognition is learned, is cultural, is contingent, and contingent is what the visual self is, what the face is, what recognition is, and recognition is what these children lacked, is what mirrors create, is what the experiment showed to require external reflection, and reflection is what makes identity include the face, what makes selfhood visual, what makes the self recognizable, and recognizable is what these children were not to themselves, were not in images, were not in mirrors when mirrors were finally shown. And the showing did not create recognition, because recognition requires learning, requires pairing, requires the repeated exposure that these children never had. And the never having revealed that identity formation requires external reflection, that the face is learned, that self-recognition is cultural, that mirrors create the visual self, and the visual self is what these children never developed, never knew, never became, and became is what they were without it, were different selves, were identities without faces, were children who couldn't recognize themselves, because identity formation requires external reflection, requires mirrors, requires the surfaces that create recognition, and recognition is what mirrors make, what reflection produces, what these children lacked, and the lacking revealed the truth, revealed the contingency, revealed that identity formation requires external reflection. Certainty became the sin, became the transgression that was punished, became the sign of pride, of arrogance, of the refusal to acknowledge limitation. And this society built its entire structure around the opposite value, around the celebration of error, around the sanctification of being wrong, around the belief that mistakes were not failures, but were revelations, were demonstrations of humility, were proof that the person was acknowledging their limitations, was accepting their fallibility, was recognizing that knowledge is always provisional, always uncertain, always potentially mistaken, and the mistaken became sacred, became the thing to aspire to, became the marker of virtue, and virtue in this society was not being right but was being willing to be wrong, was not knowing but was doubting, was not certainty but was the constant acknowledgement that certainty is impossible, that knowledge is limited, that every belief could be false, and the false became celebrated, became honoured, became the thing that festivals commemorated, that rituals enacted, that the entire culture was organised around, and the organising was systematic, was creating institutions that rewarded error, that punished correctness, that inverted all the normal incentives, all the usual values, all the expected responses to being right or wrong, and wrong became right, became the goal, became what people strived for, and striving for error became the highest calling, became the most virtuous path, became the way to demonstrate epistemic humility, to show that one was not claiming to possess truth, was not asserting certainty, was not committing the sin of believing oneself to be correct, and correct became immoral, became the sign of pride, became evidence of having failed to recognize one's own fallibility. And fallibility was the central doctrine, was the core belief, was the foundation on which the entire society was built. The recognition that humans are limited, are prone to error, are incapable of achieving certainty, and that any claim to certainty is therefore false, is therefore sinful, is therefore requiring punishment, requiring correction through the celebration of incorrectness, through the ritual acknowledgement of error, through the systematic inversion of the values that make being right desirable and being wrong shameful, and the shameful became sacred, became the thing to be proud of, became the demonstration of virtue, and virtue was being wrong, was making mistakes, was celebrating failures, and failures were what the society honoured, were what the festivals commemorated, were what the rituals enacted, and the enacting was elaborate, was involving public confessions of correctness, public acknowledgements of having believed something that turned out to be true, public expressions of shame for having been right, and being right was the transgression, was the sin, was what required confession, required penance, required the ritual humiliation of admitting that one had failed to be sufficiently humble, had failed to doubt enough, had failed to recognize the possibility of error, and the possibility was what the society insisted upon, was what the doctrine required, was the constant acknowledgement that everything believed could be wrong, that every claim could be false, that certainty is impossible, and that any feeling of certainty is delusion, is pride, is the sin that must be punished through the celebration of error, through the festival of failures, through the systematic rewarding of being wrong and the systematic punishment of being right. And right became wrong, became the thing to avoid, became the sign of having failed morally, of having committed the sin of certainty. And certainty was the ultimate transgression, was the worst sin, was what the society could not tolerate, could not accept, could not allow to persist, and the persistence of certainty was met with exile, with exclusion, with the removal from the community of those who insisted they were right, who claimed to know, who refused to acknowledge the possibility of error. And error was what the community demanded, was what membership required, was the price of belonging. And belonging meant accepting that one was wrong, that one's beliefs were false, that one's knowledge was limited, and the limited was celebrated, was honoured, was the virtue that made the society cohere, that made the culture function, that created the bonds between members who were united in their shared fallibility, in their collective acknowledgement of limitation, in their mutual celebration of error. And error became the bond, became what connected people, became what made the society possible. And the possible was a form of life that was radically different from others. That was inverting the normal values, that was making sacred what others made profane, that was celebrating what others lamented, that was honouring what others punished. And the punishment in this society was for being right, was for claiming correctness, was for displaying certainty. And certainty was the crime, was the transgression, was what could not be tolerated. And the toleration was only for error, only for doubt, only for the constant acknowledgement of fallibility. And fallibility was the doctrine, was the belief, was the foundation, and the foundation was stable, was solid, was maintaining the society for generations, for centuries, for the entire duration of its existence. And the existence was marked by the festival of failures, by the annual celebration of the greatest mistakes, of the most spectacular errors, of the claims that had been most confidently held and most thoroughly disproven. And the disproof was the achievement, was the accomplishment, was what was honoured in the festival. And the festival was elaborate, was involving performances of the errors, reenactments of the mistakes, public displays of the wrongness that had been achieved. And the achieving was intentional, was the result of effort, was the work of those who were striving to be wrong, who were seeking error, who were trying to make claims that would be false. And the false was difficult to achieve reliably, was requiring effort, was not happening automatically, because even in a society that celebrates error, even in a culture that sanctifies mistake, the tendency toward accuracy persists, the inclination toward truth remains. The unconscious processes that are trying to model reality correctly continue to operate, and the operating sometimes produces correctness, sometimes generates accuracy, sometimes results in beliefs that correspond to reality. And the correspondence was the problem, was the sin, was the transgression that required confession, required penance, required the public acknowledgement that one had been right. And being right was shameful, was evidence of failure, was proof that the person had not been sufficiently committed to error, had not tried hard enough to be wrong, had allowed accuracy to emerge. And the emergence was accidental, was unintended, was the result of the processes that make humans generally reliable at forming true beliefs, despite the society's best efforts to prevent this, despite the systematic rewarding of error and punishing of correctness, despite the entire structure being organised to celebrate mistake. The truth kept emerging, kept appearing, kept being accidentally discovered. And the discovery was the crisis, was the problem, was what the society did not know how to handle. Because the doctrine said that truth was unknowable, that certainty was impossible, that every belief was potentially false. But what happens when a belief is clearly true, when the accuracy is undeniable, when the correspondence between claim and reality is obvious to everyone? And the obvious is what created the crisis, is what produced the schism, is what happened when someone in the society got something right by accident, made a claim that was intended to be false, that was designed to demonstrate fallibility, that was meant to be an error, but turned out to be correct, turned out to be true, turned out to correspond to reality in ways that could not be denied. And the denial was attempted, was the first response, was the effort to maintain the doctrine by insisting that the claim was still wrong, was still false, was still demonstrating error, even though the evidence showed otherwise. And the evidence was overwhelming, was undeniable, was forcing the society to confront the fact that sometimes people are right, that sometimes beliefs are true, that sometimes knowledge is achieved, and the achievement was the problem, was the crisis, was what the doctrine could not accommodate. Because if someone could be right, could be correct, could know something with certainty, then the entire foundation was threatened. The entire structure was unstable. The entire culture was built on a premise that was being challenged, and the challenge came not from outside, not from critics, not from enemies, but from within, from the accidental discovery of truth, from the unintended achievement of correctness, from the mistake of being right in a society that celebrated being wrong. And being wrong was no longer possible for this claim, was no longer achievable for this belief, was no longer something that could be maintained in the face of the evidence. And the evidence was what created the split, was what divided the society, was what produced the factions, one insisting that the doctrine must be maintained, that error must still be celebrated even in the face of apparent truth, that the claim must somehow be wrong even though it appears to be right, and the other faction arguing that the doctrine itself was an error, was itself a mistake, was itself something that should be celebrated for being wrong, and the wrong was what the doctrine was about error, was about the impossibility of certainty, was about the necessity of doubt. And if the doctrine itself was wrong, then being wrong about being wrong was being right about being right, was vindicating the value of correctness, was showing that truth was possible, that certainty could be achieved, that knowledge was not always provisional, and that always was what was challenged, was what the crisis threatened, was what the accidental correctness undermined, and the undermining led to collapse, led to fragmentation, led to the dissolution of the society that had been held together by the shared celebration of error, by the collective acknowledgement of fallibility, by the mutual honouring of mistake, and the mistake that destroyed them was being right, was achieving accuracy, was discovering truth, and the truth was that error was not always achievable, that correctness sometimes emerged despite efforts to prevent it, that reality imposed itself despite the doctrine, despite the culture, despite the systematic attempts to celebrate wrongness. And wrongness was no longer universal, was no longer guaranteed, was no longer the shared condition that made the society cohere, and the coherence dissolved, was lost, was replaced by conflict between those who insisted on maintaining the doctrine and those who argued that the doctrine had been proven wrong by the very success of someone being right. And the success was accidental, was unintended, was the crisis that destroyed the cult that worshipped being wrong, that celebrated mistake, that made error sacred, and sacred was what being wrong had been, was what the society had made it, was what the culture had enforced, but the enforcement failed, was overcome, was shown to be impossible when truth emerged despite the efforts to suppress it, when correctness appeared despite the attempts to prevent it, when someone got something right by accident and the accident revealed that being wrong was not always possible, that error was not always achievable, that the doctrine itself was mistaken, was fallible, was demonstrating the very thing it claimed was universal, which was that all beliefs can be wrong, including the belief that all beliefs can be wrong, and the wrong about wrong was right about right, was showing that correctness was possible, that truth could be known, that certainty could be achieved, at least about some things, at least sometimes, at least in the case that destroyed the cult, that dissolved the society, that ended the celebration of error by demonstrating that error was not the only option, that being right was possible, that truth existed, and the existence of truth was what the cult could not tolerate, could not accommodate, could not integrate into the doctrine, and the doctrine was abandoned, was rejected, was shown to be wrong, and being wrong about the celebration of being wrong was the final irony, was the ultimate demonstration of fallibility. was the proof that even the systematic celebration of error could itself be an error, could itself be mistaken, could itself be wrong, and wrong was what the cult was about being, was what they celebrated, was what they made sacred. So being wrong about the value of being wrong should have been celebrated, should have been honoured, should have been the greatest achievement, but instead it was the crisis, was the problem, was the thing that could not be integrated, could not be accepted, could not be celebrated because it undermined everything, because it showed that the doctrine was not just wrong, but was impossibly wrong, was self-refuting, was demonstrating through its own wrongness that wrongness was not the highest value, was not the ultimate virtue, was not the thing to be celebrated, and the celebration ended, was terminated, was replaced by confusion, by conflict, by the dissolution of the society that had been held together by the shared commitment to error. And the error that destroyed them was the error of believing that error was always achievable, was always possible, was always superior to correctness, and the superiority was the claim, was the doctrine, was the foundation that collapsed when someone was accidentally right and the accident revealed that rightness was possible, that truth existed, that certainty could be achieved, and the achievement destroyed the cult that worshipped being wrong, that celebrated mistake, that made error sacred, and sacred was what it had been, was what the society had made it, but the making was unmade, was dissolved, was ended by the accidental truth, by the unintended correctness, by the crisis of being right in a society that celebrated being wrong. And being wrong was no longer the only option, was no longer the shared condition, was no longer the bond that held the society together. And together they had been, united in error, committed to mistake, celebrating failure. But the celebration ended when failure failed, when error erred, when wrongness was wrong, and wrong about wrongness was right about rightness, was showing that the doctrine was mistaken, that the cult was in error, that the worship of being wrong was itself wrong, and wrong about wrong is right, is correctness, is truth, and truth destroyed the cult, dissolved the society, ended the celebration, and the ending was the result of accident, of unintended correctness, of someone being right when they meant to be wrong, and being right destroyed everything, revealed the doctrine to be false, showed the cult to be mistaken, demonstrated that error was not always possible, that correctness sometimes emerged, that truth existed despite the celebration of mistake, and the mistake was worshipping mistake, was celebrating error, was making wrongness sacred, and sacred it was until it was shown to be wrong, until the doctrine was proven false, until the cult collapsed because someone was accidentally right, and being right was the sin, was the transgression, was the mistake that could not be forgiven, could not be celebrated, could not be integrated, and the integration failed, the society dissolved, the cult ended, and what remained was the memory of the society that celebrated being wrong, that worshipped mistake, that made error sacred, and sacred it was until truth emerged, until correctness appeared, until someone was accidentally right, and the accident destroyed everything, ended the cult, dissolved the society, terminated the celebration of being wrong. And wrong was what they were about being, was what they celebrated, was what destroyed them, when they were wrong about it, when the doctrine itself was error, when the worship was mistake, and mistake was what ended it, was what dissolved it, was what revealed that being wrong about being wrong is being right about being right, and right destroyed them, ended them, dissolved the cult that worshipped being wrong. Knowledge of death's timing changes everything, converts the abstract certainty into concrete countdown, transforms mortality from philosophical concept into calendar date, into the number of days remaining, into the tangible approaching of an endpoint that was always coming but was kept safely distant by uncertainty, by the not knowing that allowed life to proceed as if time were infinite, as if tomorrow were guaranteed, as if the future extended indefinitely even though reason knows it does not, knows it cannot, knows that death is certain and that the certainty will arrive. But the arriving felt distant, felt abstract, felt like something that happens eventually, but not yet, not soon, not on a specific date that can be marked on calendars, that can be counted down to, that can be known in advance with accuracy that is not perfect but is close enough, is 96%, is the probability that the algorithm assigns after analysing the data, after processing the medical records, the genetic information, the lifestyle factors, the environmental exposures, the family history, the biomarkers, the patterns that correlate with longevity, with disease, with the failures that lead to death, and the failures are predictable, are following patterns that machine learning can detect, can model, can use to generate predictions that are accurate enough to be actionable, to be used by insurance companies, by employers, by governments, by anyone who has access to the data and the algorithms. And the access is spreading, is becoming easier, is approaching the point where anyone can know their death date, can receive the prediction, can see the number, can confront the countdown. And the confrontation is what changes everything, is what transforms life from open-ended to finite, from abstract mortality to concrete deadline, from the someday of death to the specific day, the specific year, the specific age at which the algorithm predicts the ending will come. And the coming is what becomes real, becomes present, becomes the fact that shapes every decision, every plan, every moment. Because the moments are numbered, are limited, are approaching zero, and the zero is known, is visible, is the date that appears on the screen after the algorithm processes the data, after the calculation completes, after the probability is assigned, and the probability is high, is 96%, is accurate enough that insurance companies are using it, are adjusting premiums based on predicted death dates, are denying coverage to those whose dates are too near, are charging more to those whose dates reveal risk, reveal vulnerability, reveal the likelihood of claims, and the claims are what matter to insurers, are what drive the calculations, are what make death dates valuable information, are what justify the investment in algorithms, in data processing, in the machine learning systems that can predict mortality with accuracy that exceeds human intuition, that surpasses clinical judgment. That is better than what doctors can do, what actuaries can estimate, what anyone could know before the algorithms existed, and the existence is recent, is new, is the result of advances in computing, in data collection, in the availability of medical records, genetic sequences, lifestyle data, all the information that used to be scattered, that used to be private, that used to be inaccessible, but is now consolidated, is now analysed, is now feeding the algorithms that predict death dates. And the predictions are accurate, are reliable, are being used, are shaping decisions, are affecting lives, are creating the knowledge that was not available before, that humans did not have before, that changes what it means to be mortal, because mortality was always certain but was never scheduled, was never assigned a date, was never made concrete in the way that the algorithm makes it concrete, makes it specific, makes it countable. And the counting is what humans are doing, are responding to, are organising their lives around. Once they know, once they receive the prediction, once they see the date, and the seeing changes everything, makes priorities shift, makes some things urgent and other things irrelevant, makes the future feel different, feel shorter, feel like it is running out. And the running out is literal, is measurable, is the countdown that starts the moment the date is known, the moment the algorithm delivers its prediction. And the prediction is usually not exact, is usually a range, is usually giving a year rather than a day, but the year is specific enough, is concrete enough, is making death real in a way it was not real before. And the reality is what some cannot bear, is what drives some to ignore the prediction, to refuse the knowledge, to not ask for the date, to not run the algorithm, to maintain the uncertainty that allows life to feel open-ended, that allows the illusion of infinite time. And the illusion is functional, is protective, is what most humans need in order to function, in order to plan, in order to invest in futures that might not arrive. And the arrival is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates, is what it makes known. And the known is both liberation and burden, is both the gift of clarity and the curse of certainty, because certainty about death is not like certainty about other things, is not providing comfort, is not making life easier, is making life harder, is making every moment weighted, is making every choice consequential, is creating the pressure of the countdown, of the limited time, of the approaching zero. And the zero is death, is the end point, is the date that the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping how people live. Once they know, once they receive the information, once they confront the countdown. And the confrontation is what matters, is what the algorithm creates, is the transformation of abstract mortality into concrete deadline. And the deadline is what changes behavior, is what makes some people quit their jobs, leave their marriages, pursue dreams they had deferred, make radical changes in the hope that the changes will alter the prediction, will push the date further away, will buy more time. And the time is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes precious once it is known to be limited. Once the limit is visible, once the countdown begins, and the beginning is the moment of knowing, is the moment the prediction is delivered, is the moment the algorithm completes its calculation and displays the date. And the date is sometimes soon, is sometimes far, is sometimes already past, and the past is the strangest case. Is the situation where the algorithm predicts a death date that has already occurred, that has already passed, and the passing means the prediction was wrong, means the person has outlived their calculated mortality, has survived beyond what the algorithm expected, and the expectation was based on data, was based on patterns, was based on probabilities that apply to populations, but not necessarily to individuals. And the individual is what matters, is what the algorithm is trying to predict. But individuals vary, individuals are unique, individuals do not always follow the patterns, and the patterns are statistical, are probabilistic, are accurate for groups, but not always for persons. And persons are what the algorithm is being applied to, is being used on, is generating predictions for, and the predictions are mostly accurate, are right 96% of the time. But the 4% is significant, is the margin where the algorithm fails, where the prediction is wrong, where people die earlier than predicted or survive longer than predicted. And the longer is what some experience, is what creates the strange situation of living past one's predicted death date, of waking up on the day after the day that was supposed to be the last day. And the last day was not the last, was not the ending, was just another day. And the day after is another day. And the days continue, and the continuation is confusing, is disorienting, is raising questions about what the prediction meant, about whether it was wrong, about whether the algorithm failed, or whether something changed, whether the person's condition improved, whether the factors that were feeding the prediction shifted, and the shifting is possible, is part of what makes the predictions not fixed, not absolute, not carved in stone, but calculated from data that is current at the moment of calculation, but that changes, that evolves, that reflects conditions that can improve or deteriorate. And the improvement is what some people achieve, is what some people work toward, is the reason some people change their lifestyles. After receiving the prediction, after seeing the date, after confronting the countdown. And the countdown motivates, creates urgency, creates the pressure to change, to improve, to extend the time, to push the date further away. And the pushing is sometimes successful, is sometimes resulting in new predictions, in updated calculations, in revised death dates that are later than the original dates. And the later is what everyone wants, is what the changes are aiming for, is what makes people exercise, eat differently, Reduce stress, stop smoking, address conditions that were being ignored, take medications that were being skipped, make appointments that were being postponed, all in the hope that the algorithm will notice, will incorporate the changes, will recalculate, will generate a new prediction with a later date. And the later is what some people achieve, is what some people see when they run the algorithm again, when they check the prediction, when they look for evidence that their efforts have mattered, have changed the trajectory, have bought time. And the time is what matters, is what the algorithm quantifies, is what becomes visible through the prediction. And the prediction is not destiny, is not fate, is not fixed, is probability, is likelihood, is the best estimate based on data. But estimates can be wrong. Data can change, probabilities can shift. And the shifting is what makes the algorithm dynamic, makes the predictions update, makes the death dates change. Sometimes moving closer, sometimes moving further, sometimes disappearing entirely when new data arrives, when conditions improve, when the patterns that were predicting early death are disrupted by interventions, by treatments, by changes that alter the trajectory. And the trajectory is what the algorithm models, is what it calculates, is what it uses to predict the future. And the future is uncertain, is probabilistic, is not determined, but is shaped by choices, by circumstances, by the countless factors that influence health, that affect longevity, that determine when death arrives. And the arriving is what the algorithm predicts, is what it calculates with 96% accuracy. But the accuracy is for populations, is statistical, is not guaranteed for individuals. And individuals are what matter, are who receive the predictions, are who live with the knowledge, are who face the countdown. And the countdown is real, is concrete, is making mortality tangible in a way it never was before. And the before was uncertainty, was the not knowing that allowed life to feel open-ended, that allowed plans to extend indefinitely, that allowed the future to seem guaranteed even though it was not, even though death was always certain, always approaching, always inevitable. And the inevitable is what the algorithm makes visible, makes specific, makes countable. And the counting is what changes everything, is what transforms life. Once the date is known, once the prediction is received, once the algorithm delivers its calculation, and the calculation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping insurance, shaping employment, shaping medical care, shaping decisions about treatment, about intervention, about whether to invest in extending life, when the extension is predicted to be brief, when the algorithm says the time is short, when the date is near, and the near is what matters, is what determines coverage, determines access, determines whether resources are allocated, whether treatments are approved, whether hope is offered or withheld. And the withholding is what some fear, is what the algorithm enables, is the denial of care based on predicted death dates, based on the calculation that says the investment is not worth it, that the time remaining is too brief, that the return is insufficient, and the return is measured in life years, in quality-adjusted survival, in the metrics that reduce existence to numbers, to calculations, to the outputs of algorithms that predict mortality and that are used to decide who receives treatment and who does not, who gets coverage and who is denied, who is worth investing in and who is not. And the not worth is the judgment that the algorithm makes possible, is the decision that becomes justifiable when death dates are known, when predictions are reliable, when accuracy is 96% and the percent is high enough to be trusted, to be acted upon, to be used as basis for decisions that affect lives, that determine futures, that shape who survives and who does not. And the survival is what matters, is what everyone wants, is what the algorithm is supposedly helping by predicting, by warning, by providing information that can be used to intervene, to prevent, to extend life. But the extension is not guaranteed, is not automatic, is requiring resources, requiring access, requiring the willingness to invest in futures that might be brief, that might not extend far beyond the predicted date. And the date is what hangs over everything, is what shapes decisions, is what makes some futures seem worth pursuing, and others not. And the not worth is the category that some people are placed into once their death dates are known, once their predictions reveal short timelines, limited futures, approaching endpoints. And the endpoints are what the algorithm calculates, are what it makes visible, are what transform mortality from abstract to concrete, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is what changes everything, is. What makes death real is what creates the countdown, the pressure, the urgency, the weight of limited time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date that the algorithm predicted, and the prediction is accurate, is reliable, is right 96% of the time. And the time is what matters, is what is being counted, is what is being lost, is what is approaching exhaustion. And the exhaustion is death, is the end point, is the zero that the countdown reaches, and the reaching is inevitable, is certain, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what the death date represents. And the representation is accurate, is reliable, is being used, is shaping reality, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from philosophical abstraction into calendar appointment, into the date that is marked, that is known, that is approaching. And the approaching is what matters, is what changes everything, is what makes the algorithm powerful, is what makes the prediction consequential, is what transforms knowledge of death date from curiosity into burden, from information into weight, from prediction into reality. And the reality is that death is approaching, is scheduled, is calculated, is known. And the knowing changes everything, makes every moment count, makes every decision matter, makes life feel urgent, finite, precious, limited. And the limited is what the algorithm reveals, is what the death date represents, is what 96% accuracy means, which is that the countdown is real, is reliable, is approaching the end, and the end is death, is the date, is what the algorithm predicts, is what the calculation shows, is what some people know, is what some people live with, is what some people count down to. And the counting is real, is happening, is making mortality concrete, is transforming death from abstraction to appointment, from someday to specific day, from uncertain to known. And the known is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the death date that is calculated, that is displayed, that is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is running out, is approaching zero, is moving toward the date, and the date is death, is the end point, is what the algorithm predicts, is what some people know, is what changes everything, is the countdown, is the calculation, is the algorithm that predicts death date with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what matters, is what makes the prediction real, is what makes mortality concrete, is what makes death a date, a number, a countdown. And the countdown is happening, is real, is approaching zero, is moving toward death. And death is the algorithm, is the prediction, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is approaching. And the approaching is certain, is reliable, is accurate 96% of the time. And the time is what remains, is what is counted, is what is running out. And the running out is death, is the date, is what the algorithm predicts. And the prediction is accurate, is real, is the countdown to death, to the end point, to the zero. And the zero is approaching, is certain, is the date that is known, that is calculated, that is predicted by the algorithm with 96% accuracy. And the accuracy is what makes it real, what makes it matter, what makes death a date. And the date is approaching, is certain, is the countdown, is the algorithm, is the prediction, is death. Balancing intuition and theory. There is a method in philosophy that claims to find truth not by discovering foundations, not by building from self-evident axioms, not by appealing to revelation or pure reason, but by seeking coherence, by adjusting beliefs until they fit together, by moving back and forth between particular judgments and general principles until a stable equilibrium is reached. And this method is called reflective equilibrium, and it was developed most fully by John Rawls in his work on justice, though the idea stretches back through the history of philosophy, back to the recognition that neither pure theory nor pure intuition can be trusted alone, that each must constrain and correct the other. That truth emerges from their interaction rather than from either in isolation. The process begins with considered judgments, with the moral intuitions people have about particular cases. Intuitions like slavery is wrong, promise breaking requires justification, causing unnecessary suffering is bad, and these intuitions are the raw material, the data that ethical theory must account for, but they are not infallible, not sacrosanct, not immune to revision. They are provisional starting points that might be mistaken, might be the product of bias or prejudice or limited understanding, and the method acknowledges this, acknowledges that intuitions can be wrong while still insisting they are the only place to start, the only access we have to moral reality, because if we do not begin with intuitions, then where do we begin? What other source of moral knowledge is there? And the answer seems to be none. No pure reason that delivers ethical truths, no perception that reveals moral facts, no authority that can be trusted without question. Only the messy collection of judgments people make about cases, judgments that often conflict, that differ across cultures, that change over time, and yet somehow, from this unpromising material, moral philosophy must be constructed. Rawls distinguished between narrow and wide reflective equilibrium. Narrow equilibrium is achieved when particular judgments and general principles are brought into coherence with each other, but nothing else. When the theory fits the intuitions and the intuitions fit the theory, but no attention is paid to alternative theories, to background beliefs, to empirical facts about human nature or social organization. And this is relatively easy to achieve, but not very stable, not very trustworthy, because it might be that another theory fits the intuitions just as well, might be that the intuitions themselves rest on false empirical beliefs, might be that the whole system is coherent but disconnected from reality. A beautiful castle built on sand and wide equilibrium tries to avoid this by expanding the scope of what must cohere, by requiring that the theory fit not just with moral intuitions but with considered beliefs about psychology, about society, about human nature, with alternative moral theories that have been seriously considered and rejected for good reasons. And this makes equilibrium harder to achieve, but more robust, more likely to track truth rather than merely achieve internal consistency, because it forces the theorist to confront challenges, to test the theory against competitors, to ensure that coherence is not just local, but global, not just moral, but includes everything the person believes. But this raises an immediate problem, the problem of whether intuitions are really data, whether they deserve the role Rawls assigns them, whether they are observations of moral reality or merely expressions of cultural conditioning, of evolutionary adaptation, of psychological bias. And if intuitions are not perceptions of moral facts, but products of contingent causal processes, then why should they constrain theory at all? Why not just construct moral theory from scratch using pure reason, using consistency and simplicity and other theoretical virtues, and let the intuitions fall where they may? And some philosophers have argued exactly this, have argued that intuitions are unreliable, that they differ too much across individuals and cultures to be evidence, that they are shaped by factors that have nothing to do with truth, by emotion and self-interest and social pressure. And if this is right, then reflective equilibrium is not a method for discovering moral truth, but for rationalizing prejudice, for systematizing whatever intuitions one happens to have, for building coherent theories that reflect nothing more than the contingent moral psychology of the theorist. Rawls was aware of this objection. He restricted the relevant intuitions to considered judgments made under favourable conditions, when the person is calm and informed and has no personal stake in the outcome, when they are not distracted by irrelevant factors, when they have thought carefully about the case, and this restriction is supposed to filter out the unreliable intuitions, the ones produced by bias or emotion or confusion, and leave only the reliable ones, the ones that are genuinely responsive to moral reality. But critics ask how we know which intuitions are made under favourable conditions, how we distinguish the reliable from the unreliable without already having a moral theory. And if we need a theory to identify good intuitions, then we cannot use intuitions to build the theory. We are reasoning in a circle, using theory to select data and data to support theory. And this circularity seems vicious, seems to undermine the entire method, because it means we can get any result we want just by choosing the right intuitions, by labeling the intuitions that fit our preferred theory as considered judgments, and dismissing the rest as unreliable. And there is no independent check, no way to break into the circle from outside, no neutral standpoint from which to evaluate whether the equilibrium reached tracks truth or merely reflects the prejudices we started with. Goodman faced a similar problem in the philosophy of science with his work on induction. He argued that inductive rules are justified by their conformity to accepted inductive inferences, and accepted inferences are justified by their conformity to rules. And this seems circular in the same way, seems to justify induction by appeal to induction. But Goodman argued the circularity was not vicious but virtuous, that this is how justification works, not by reduction to foundations but by mutual support, by coherence among elements, none of which are independently justified, but which together form a stable system. And Rawls borrowed this idea, applied it to ethics, argued that moral theory is justified the same way, not by derivation from self-evident principles, but by coherence with considered judgments. And just as scientific method is justified by its success in producing reliable predictions and explanations, moral theory is justified by its success in organizing and explaining moral phenomena, in capturing what is right about our intuitions while correcting what is wrong. And this is not circular reasoning, but reflective reasoning, reasoning that loops back on itself, that uses its own outputs as inputs, that gradually refines itself through iteration. And the result is not certainty, but reasonable confidence, not proof, but the best we can do given our epistemic situation, given that we are finite creatures trying to understand domains that exceed our individual capacities. But the analogy to science is controversial because science has a reality check, has observation and experiment, has ways of testing theories against the world that do not depend entirely on coherence. And ethics lacks this, has no moral microscope, no way to observe moral facts independently of intuition. And if intuitions are all we have, then coherence among them is just coherence among beliefs, is not evidence of truth, but only evidence of consistency. And many philosophers have argued that this is not enough, that ethics needs something more than reflective equilibrium, needs some external constraint, some connection to reality that goes beyond mere coherence. And this is where moral realism enters. The view that there are objective moral facts independent of human belief, facts that make moral judgments true or false. And the realist thinks reflective equilibrium might accidentally hit on truth, but cannot guarantee it, cannot ensure that the equilibrium reached corresponds to reality rather than just organizing our prejudices into a coherent system, while the anti-realist thinks there are no moral facts, that all ethics can do is organize intuitions into coherent systems, and reflective equilibrium is the best method available because it is the only method available, because there is nothing beyond coherence to aim for. Singer challenges reflective equilibrium from a different angle. He argues that many widely shared intuitions are simply wrong, are products of speciesism or other biases, and that a good moral theory should reject these intuitions rather than accommodate them, should revise our judgments radically rather than merely refining them. And if Singer is right, then reflective equilibrium is too conservative, too wedded to existing intuitions, too reluctant to overturn established moral beliefs. And the method will never lead to radical moral progress, will never challenge deeply held prejudices, will only produce theories that ratify the status quo with minor modifications. And this seems like a serious problem, because the history of ethics is a history of moral progress, of learning that practices once thought acceptable were actually wrong, of expanding the moral circle to include those previously excluded, and this progress often required rejecting intuitions that seemed obvious to earlier generations. Rejecting the intuition that women were inferior, that slavery was natural, that animals had no moral status, and if these intuitions had been treated as data to be preserved in reflective equilibrium, then moral progress would have been impossible. The method would have locked in the prejudices of the age rather than enabling their critique. Rawls responds that reflective equilibrium does allow for revision of intuitions, that the process is not conservative but dialectical, that general principles can lead us to reject particular judgments when they conflict, that the equilibrium reached might be quite distant from the intuitions we started with, and he points to his own theory of justice, which leads to conclusions many people find counterintuitive, which argues for principles that would radically transform existing social arrangements. And this shows that the method does not simply ratify existing beliefs, but can challenge them, can lead to revisionary conclusions. But the question remains whether it can challenge them enough, whether the method is capable of truly radical critique, or whether it is always pulled back toward the mainstream by the weight of established intuitions, by the requirement that theory accommodate at least some of our considered judgments. And if it cannot accommodate any judgments, then what is the point of reflective equilibrium? Why not just do pure moral theory without regard for intuitions? And this is the tension at the heart of the method, the need to respect intuitions while remaining open to revising them, the need to start somewhere while acknowledging that the starting point might be entirely wrong. Parfit distinguished between two kinds of moral theorizing: bottom-up theorizing that starts with intuitions and builds principles to explain them, and top-down theorizing that starts with principles and derives conclusions regardless of whether they match intuitions. And reflective equilibrium is supposed to be neither purely bottom-up nor purely top-down, but a combination, a method that moves in both directions, that uses principles to test intuitions and intuitions to test principles. But in practice, most philosophers lean one way or the other. Some trust intuitions more and will reject theories that conflict with strong intuitions, no matter how elegant the theory, while others trust theory more and will reject intuitions no matter how strong, if the theory implies they're wrong. And this split reflects deeper disagreements about the nature of moral knowledge, about whether ethics is more like perception, where we observe facts, or more like mathematics, where we reason from axioms. And reflective equilibrium tries to split the difference, but might satisfy neither side, might be too rationalist for the intuitionists and too intuitionist for the rationalists, might be a compromise that inherits the weaknesses of both approaches without fully gaining the strengths of either. The theory-ladenness of observation is a problem in science, and an even bigger problem in ethics, because intuitions are not neutral observations, but are shaped by the theories we already hold, by the concepts we use, by the categories we think in, and this means that intuitions cannot serve as independent checks on theory, because they are already contaminated by theory, are already expressions of theoretical commitments rather than raw data. And when we achieve reflective equilibrium between intuitions and theory, we might just be finding coherence between a theory and the intuitions that theory itself generated. We are making the theory consistent with its own implications rather than with independent reality. And this is not a test, not a confirmation, not evidence of truth. It is just circular reasoning dressed up as a method. And the only way to break the circle would be to have theory-neutral intuitions. Intuitions that are not shaped by any theoretical commitments. But such intuitions might not exist, might be impossible, because all judgment requires concepts, and all concepts embody theoretical assumptions, and this means we are trapped inside our conceptual schemes, unable to step outside them to check whether they correspond to reality, unable to do anything but reorganize them into more or less coherent patterns. Neurath's boat is the metaphor often used here. The idea that we are like sailors who must rebuild their ship while at sea, who cannot return to dry dock, who must stand on some planks while replacing others, who can never inspect the whole. Structure at once, but must trust that the parts they are not currently working on are sound enough to support them, and reflective equilibrium is like this, is a process of revising beliefs, while standing on other beliefs, of using some judgments to evaluate others without ever having a belief-free standpoint, without ever achieving the kind of foundation that traditional epistemology sought. And this seems precarious, seems to offer no guarantee of truth, seems to allow for the possibility that the entire system could be coherent but false, that we could achieve perfect equilibrium while being radically wrong about everything. And defenders of the method acknowledge this possibility, but argue it is unavoidable, argue that there is no alternative, that all reasoning is like this, that the demand for foundations is a mistake, that coherence is not a second-best substitute for foundation, but the only kind of justification there is. And we must either accept this or give up on justification entirely, give up on the possibility of distinguishing better from worse beliefs. And this is not acceptable. So we must accept reflective equilibrium, despite its limitations, despite its circularity, despite its inability to guarantee truth. The method has been applied beyond ethics, has been used in epistemology and metaphysics, and even in empirical sciences, wherever there is a need to balance theory and data, wherever neither can be trusted absolutely, wherever truth seems to emerge from coherence rather than correspondence. And this generalization suggests the method captures something deep about human reasoning, something about how finite creatures with limited access to reality must navigate uncertainty, must construct understanding from partial and fallible materials, must accept that justification is always provisional, always subject to revision, always dependent on a network of beliefs that might themselves need revision. And this is not skepticism, not the claim that we cannot know anything, but fallibilism, the claim that we can know things but cannot know them with certainty, cannot eliminate the possibility of error, cannot achieve the kind of absolute justification that philosophers once sought but must settle for something weaker, something more human, something that acknowledges our limitations, while still insisting that some beliefs are better justified than others, that some theories fit the evidence better than others, that coherence matters even if it does not guarantee truth. The psychological research on moral intuitions complicates the picture further, because it shows that intuitions are fast, automatic, emotionally laden judgments that often precede reasoning rather than result from it, that people typically judge first and justify later, that the reasoning we offer for moral judgments is often post hoc rationalization rather than the actual cause of the judgment. And if this is true, then reflective equilibrium is not a description of how moral thinking actually works, but a normative ideal, a recommendation for how it should work. And the question is whether this ideal is achievable, whether people can actually suspend their automatic judgments long enough to engage in the kind of reflective process Rawls describes, whether we can override our intuitions when theory demands it, or whether we are psychologically incapable of this, whether our reasoning is always in service of our intuitions rather than capable of genuinely evaluating them, and if we are psychologically incapable of genuine reflective equilibrium, then the method is not just difficult, but impossible, is an ideal that cannot be realized, and all actual moral theorizing is just rationalization of intuitions that we are stuck with, that we cannot revise no matter how much we reflect. And this would be a devastating conclusion, would suggest that moral philosophy is futile, that it cannot correct our biases because those biases are built into the very process of moral thought. But the research is contested, the interpretation is disputed, and many philosophers remain hopeful that reflection can genuinely revise intuition, that humans are capable of the kind of self-correction that reflective equilibrium requires, even if it is difficult, even if it goes against psychological grain, even if most people, most of the time, fail to achieve it. Power does not distribute evenly, does not spread across populations in equal measure, does not settle into equilibrium where everyone has the same, but instead concentrates, accumulates, forms gradients that are steep, that create hierarchies that are natural, not in the sense of being just, but in the sense of being inevitable, being the default pattern that emerges whenever humans organize, whenever groups form, whenever coordination is needed. And the need for coordination is constant, is the condition of social existence, and coordination requires decision-making, requires that someone decides when decisions cannot be made collectively, when consensus is impossible, when speed is necessary, and the necessity creates the opening for power, creates the opportunity for some to decide for others, and the deciding is power, is the core of it, is the ability to shape outcomes, to determine directions, to control resources, and once this ability concentrates, once some have it more than others, the concentration tends to increase, tends to amplify, tends to create the hierarchies that are visible in every society, every organization, every group that persists over time because power reproduces power, is self-reinforcing, is creating the conditions that allow more power to accumulate, and the accumulation is not accidental, is not the result of conspiracy, is the natural geometry of social organization, is the shape that power takes when humans interact over time, and the shape is pyramidal, is hierarchical, is arranging people into levels, into ranks, into positions that vary in their access to resources, to decision-making, to influence, and the variation is not small, is not modest, is extreme, is exponential, is creating gaps between levels that are wider than the gaps within levels. And the widest gap is at the top, is between those who have power and those who do not. And those who have power are few, are the minority, are the elite who sit at the apex of the hierarchy. And the apex is narrow, is limited, is only accommodating a small number, because power shared is power diluted, is power threatened, is power that might be challenged. And so those at the top work to maintain their position, work to prevent others from ascending, work to ensure that the hierarchy remains steep, remains stable, remains resistant to change. And the resistance is not passive, is active, is the exercise of power to preserve power, is the use of resources to maintain access to resources, is the employment of influence to prevent the emergence of rival influences. And the employment is continuous, is strategic, is operating at multiple levels, through multiple mechanisms, through the formal and the informal, through the visible and the invisible, through the structures that are explicit and the processes that are hidden. And the hidden is where power is most effective, is where it operates without being seen, without being named, without being recognized as power. Because power that is visible is power that can be challenged, that can be resisted, that can be opposed, but power that is invisible, that operates through assumptions, through norms, through the structures that are taken for granted, is power that is unassailable, is power that reproduces itself without anyone noticing, without anyone objecting, without anyone having the language to describe what is happening. And what is happening is the maintenance of hierarchy through the 1,000 small mechanisms that ensure power stays where it is, that prevent redistribution, that make equality impossible, not just difficult, but structurally impossible, because the system is designed to concentrate power, is organized to funnel resources upward, is arranged to ensure that those at the top remain at the top, and the remaining is not guaranteed by force alone, is not maintained through violence alone, though violence is always available, is always in the background, is the ultimate guarantee of hierarchy. But most of the time force is not needed, is not employed because power has more subtle tools, has mechanisms that operate through consent, through the willing participation of those who are dominated. And the willing is not coerced in the obvious sense, is not forced at gunpoint, is produced through ideology, through the stories that are told about why hierarchy is natural, is necessary, is beneficial. And the beneficial is what those at the top claim, is what they teach, is what they convince others to believe, that hierarchy serves everyone, that power at the top creates order that protects those below, that inequality is the price of stability, of prosperity, of progress, and progress is the mythology that justifies hierarchy, that makes inequality seem temporary, that makes power seem earned, that makes the concentration seem like the result of merit rather than of position. And position is what matters, is what determines outcomes, is what makes some people powerful and others powerless. But the position is inherited, is transmitted, is maintained across generations through the mechanisms that convert power into wealth and wealth into power. And the conversion is seamless, is automatic, is the way that hierarchy perpetuates itself, that ensures that the children of the powerful are powerful, that the descendants of the elite remain elite, that the system reproduces itself. And the reproduction is not perfect, is not total. There is some mobility, some movement between levels, some stories of ascent that serve to legitimate the system, that create the illusion of meritocracy, that make it seem as though anyone can rise, but the rising is rare, is exceptional, is the exception that proves the rule. And the rule is that power stays where it is, that hierarchy is stable, that the geometry is fixed, and the fixing is not natural in the sense of being inevitable by physics, but is natural in the sense of emerging from the logic of organization, from the mathematics of networks, from the dynamics of accumulation, because power is not zero-sum in the short term, can grow, can expand, can create more power, but in the long term, in the context of limited resources, of finite opportunities, of scarce positions, power is rivalrous, is competed for, is gained by some at the expense of others. And the gaining is easier for those who already have power, is easier from positions of advantage, is following the principle that Matthew identified, that to those who have more will be given, and from those who have little, even what they have will be taken, and the taking is not theft, is not crime, is the normal operation of systems that concentrate power, that funnel resources upward, that ensure that advantage compounds, that success breeds success, that power accumulates and the accumulation is exponential, is accelerating, is creating gaps that widen over time, that make the top more distant from the bottom, that make mobility less possible, that make hierarchy more rigid, more entrenched, more resistant to change. And the resistance is structural, is built into the geometry, is not requiring conspiracy, not requiring explicit coordination, is just the natural result of power protecting itself, of those at the top using their position to maintain their position. And the maintenance is not cynical, is not experienced as exploitation, is justified through ideologies that explain why hierarchy is good, why power deserves to be concentrated, why inequality is natural. And natural is the word that does the work, is the justification, is the claim that hierarchy is not created by humans, but is discovered in nature, is visible in animals, in the dominance hierarchies that primates form, that wolves form, that even chickens form, and the forming is instinctive, is biological, is the way that evolution has shaped social species. And if it is natural, then it is not unjust, is not wrong, is simply the way things are, and the way things are is the most powerful justification, is the argument that requires no argument, is the appeal to inevitability, to necessity, to the claim that hierarchy cannot be otherwise. And the cannot is false, is ideological, is the masking of choice as fate, is the presentation of arrangement as nature. Because hierarchies are arrangements, are geometries that are created, that are maintained, that are enforced, and the enforcement is continuous, is requiring effort, is revealing that the naturalness is myth, is story, is the cover for power, for the exercise of domination, for the structuring of society in ways that benefit the top at the expense of the bottom. And the bottom is where most people are, is the base of the pyramid, is the many who support the few, who generate the resources that are concentrated at the apex, who do the work that creates the wealth that flows upward. And the flowing is not natural, but is designed, is structured through laws, through institutions, through the mechanisms that extract value from the many and deliver it to the few. And the delivery is called profit, is called return, is called the reward for capital, for ownership, for the position of controlling resources. And control is power, is the core of it, is the ability to decide how resources are used, who benefits, who is excluded, and the exclusion is the mechanism, is how hierarchy maintains itself, is how power reproduces power, because access is limited, is restricted, is controlled by those who already have access. And access to what? To opportunities, to resources, to the positions that confer power. And the conferring is not automatic, is not open, is requiring credentials, requiring connections, requiring the social capital that comes from position. And position is inherited, is transmitted, is the thing that makes hierarchy stable, that prevents mobility, that ensures that the geometry remains fixed. And the fixed is what those at the top want, is what they work to maintain, is what they defend through the mechanisms that are both overt and covert, that operate through law and through culture, through institutions and through norms, through the structures that are formal and the processes that are informal. And the informal is where much of the work happens, is where power operates most effectively, through networks, through relationships, through the soft power that is harder to see, harder to challenge, harder to dismantle than the hard power of force, of law, of explicit command, because soft power operates through influence, through persuasion, through the shaping of desires and beliefs, through the creation of consent. And consent is what makes hierarchy stable, is what allows domination without constant coercion, is what Gramsci called hegemony, is the condition where the dominated accept their domination, where the powerless believe in the legitimacy of power, where the hierarchy seems natural, seems right, seems like the way things should be, and the should is the achievement, is the conversion of power into authority, of domination into legitimacy, of hierarchy into order. And order is what power promises, is what it delivers, is the stability that comes from everyone knowing their place, accepting their rank, performing their role. And the performing is not resisted, because resistance seems pointless, seems impossible, seems like challenging nature itself. And nature is the mask, is the story, is the ideology that makes power invisible, that makes hierarchy seem inevitable, that makes inequality seem like the necessary cost of civilization. And civilization is the achievement of hierarchy, is the organization of humans into structures that are complex, that are specialized, that are requiring coordination. And coordination is impossible without power, without hierarchy, without someone deciding, someone directing, someone controlling. And the controlling is concentrated, is centralized, is accumulating at the top. And the top is where decisions are made, where resources are allocated, where the direction is set. And the setting is not democratic, is not collective, is not reflecting the will of the many, but is reflecting the interests of the few, of those who have power, of those who sit at the apex. And the apex is maintained through the geometry, through the structure that ensures power flows upward, that resources concentrate, that advantage compounds. And the compounding is what makes hierarchy self-perpetuating, is what makes power stable, is what prevents the redistribution that would create equality. And equality is unstable, is impossible to maintain, is the condition that immediately begins to dissolve once it is achieved. Because humans are not equal in ability, in effort, in ambition. And these differences, even small differences, compound over time, create advantages, create positions, create the beginnings of hierarchy. And once hierarchy begins, it accelerates, it amplifies, it creates the geometry that is inevitable. That is natural, not because it is good, but because it is the pattern that emerges from the mathematics of accumulation, from the logic of networks, from the dynamics of power. And power, seeks to grow, seeks to concentrate. And the concentration is resisted, is challenged, is fought against by those who are excluded, by those who are dominated, by those who suffer under hierarchy. But the resistance is difficult, is requiring coordination, is requiring resources, is requiring power. And power is what the powerless lack, is what they're excluded from, is what makes resistance so difficult, so costly, so often unsuccessful. And the unsuccessful is what history shows, is what the record demonstrates, is the pattern of hierarchies rising and falling, but never disappearing, never being replaced by equality, only being replaced by new hierarchies, by new elites, by new concentrations of power that reproduce the geometry, that maintain the structure, that ensure that power remains concentrated, that hierarchy remains the default, remains the pattern, remains the inevitable outcome of human organization. And the organization is what creates power, is what makes hierarchy necessary, or seems to make it necessary. Because organization requires coordination, and coordination requires decision-making, and decision-making requires power. And power is what some have and others do not. And those who have it work to keep it, work to grow it, work to pass it on. And the passing on is inheritance, is the mechanism of reproduction, is what makes hierarchy stable across time. And the stability is what those at the top value, is what they work to maintain, is what they defend against challenges, against redistribution, against the equality that would threaten their position. And the position is everything, is what determines outcomes, is what makes life easy or hard, is what provides access or denies it, is what confers power or withholds it. And the withholding is structural, is built into the geometry, is the way that hierarchy maintains itself, is the iron law that Michael's identified, is the principle that all organizations, even those founded on egalitarian principles, eventually develop hierarchies, eventually concentrate power, eventually create oligarchies, because organization requires leadership, and leadership becomes power, and power becomes self-perpetuating, becomes the thing that shapes the organization to serve the leaders rather than the members. And the members are the many, are the base, are those who do the work but do not make the decisions, do not control the resources, do not have the power. And the power is what accumulates at the top, is what defines the apex, is what makes hierarchy hierarchical. And the hierarchical is the geometry, is the structure, is the arrangement that is not accidental, is not temporary, is not the result of bad actors or flawed systems, but is the natural pattern, the inevitable outcome, the shape that power takes when humans organize, when groups form, when societies persist. And the persistence is what makes hierarchy visible, is what reveals the geometry, is what shows that power does not distribute evenly, does not create equality, does not settle into balance, but instead concentrates, accumulates, forms the pyramids that are visible everywhere, in every society, in every organization, in every context where humans coordinate, and the coordination requires hierarchy, or seems to require it, and the seeming is enough, is what makes it real, is what makes the geometry inevitable, is what ensures that power will concentrate, that inequality will persist, that hierarchy will remain the default pattern, the natural arrangement, the geometry of power that shapes human life, that determines outcomes, that creates the world where some have much and most have little, where some decide and most obey, where some rule and most are ruled, and the ruling is not eternal, is not permanent. Hierarchies fall, are replaced, are overturned, but they are not eliminated, are not abolished, are not transcended, because the geometry remains, the pattern persists, the structure reasserts itself, and new hierarchies form, new elites emerge, new concentrations of power accumulate at new apexes, and the cycle continues. The pattern repeats, the geometry remains. Because power concentrates, because hierarchy is natural, because equality is unstable, because the geometry of power is not optional, is not chosen, is not the result of conspiracy or design, but is the inevitable outcome, the natural pattern, the way that power arranges itself when humans organize, and the organizing never stops, and the hierarchy never ends, and the geometry persists, always, inevitably, naturally, as the shape of power, as the structure of domination, as the pattern that defines human society, that creates inequality, that maintains hierarchy, that ensures that power remains concentrated, that the few rule the many, that the apex dominates the base, that the geometry of power remains fixed, remains stable, remains the eternal pattern, the natural arrangement, the inevitable structure that is hierarchy, that is power. That is the way things are and have always been and will always be, as long as humans organize, as long as groups form, as long as power exists, and power always exists, always concentrates, always creates the geometry that is hierarchy, that is domination, that is the natural, inevitable, inescapable pattern of human organization, and the organization is power, and power is hierarchy, and hierarchy is geometry, and the geometry is eternal. Memory is not a gift, but a burden. Not the preservation of experience, but its prolongation. Not the recording of the past, but its endless present tense replay. And this replay is what makes trauma permanent, what makes suffering extend beyond its moment, what converts a single event into a lifetime of pain, because the event is not just remembered, but is relived. It is re-experienced in the body, in the nervous system, in the patterns of activation that do not distinguish between then and now, between memory and occurrence, between representation and reality, and so the past remains present, remains active, remains capable of causing suffering long after the original threat has passed, long after the danger is over, long after any adaptive function of remembering could be served, and this persistence raises the question of whether some memories should be erased, whether some experiences should be forgotten, whether the technology that is emerging that promises to selectively delete traumatic memories while leaving other memories intact should be used, should be embraced, should be offered to those whose lives are destroyed by memories. They cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive, and the survival is what is at stake, is what makes the question urgent. Because some memories are incompatible with living, are producing symptoms that are unbearable, are creating suffering so severe that the person carrying the memory would choose non-existence over continued remembering, and the choices being made is visible in suicide rates, in substance abuse, in all the ways that people try to escape memories that will not let them go, and the letting go is what forgetting would provide, is what erasure would accomplish, is the liberation from the past that therapy tries to achieve, but often fails to deliver. Because therapy works with memory, works through memory, tries to integrate the traumatic experience into narrative, into meaning, into the story of the self. But some experiences resist integration, resist meaning, resist becoming part of any story except the story of horror, of violation, of the destruction of everything that makes life livable. And when integration fails, when meaning cannot be found, when the memory remains as intrusive, as overwhelming, as fragmenting as it was at the moment of encoding, then what is the ethical response? Is it to insist that the person continue carrying the memory, continue suffering from it, continue being destroyed by it? Or is it to offer erasure, to provide the technology that could remove the memory, could delete the trace, could free the person from the past? And the freedom is what erasure promises, is what makes it appealing, is what drives the development of techniques that can target specific memories, that can identify the neural patterns associated with traumatic experiences and disrupt them, prevent them from reconsolidating, make them inaccessible. And the inaccessibility is forgetting, is the functional equivalent of the memory never having been formed. And if the memory was never formed, then the trauma never happened. Not in the sense that the event did not occur, but in the sense that it is not remembered, is not present, is not continuing to shape experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if the influence is removed, then the past is effectively erased, is no longer part of the person's life, is no longer determining their responses, their possibilities, their sense of who they are. And the who they are is the problem, is the question that erasure raises. Because if identity is constituted by memory, if the self is the narrative constructed from experiences, then what happens to identity when memories are deleted, when experiences are removed, when the continuity is broken? And the continuity is what makes the self feel stable, feel coherent, feel like the same person over time. And if memories are erased, then the person who emerges is not the same person, is someone different, is someone who did not have those experiences, who was not shaped by that trauma, who does not carry that pain. And this difference is what makes erasure controversial, is what raises the ethical question of whether it is right to change someone's identity, to make them into someone else, even if that someone else would suffer less, would function better, would have a life that is livable, because the life that is livable is not the life of the person who chose erasure, is the life of a different person, a person who is created by the deletion of memory. And creation through deletion is strange, is unsettling, is raising questions about what it means to be the same person, what continuity consists of, what identity requires, and the requirements are not clear, are disputed, are the subject of philosophical debate that has no resolution. Because some theories say that identity requires psychological continuity, requires that there be a chain of memories connecting present self to past self. And if that chain is broken, if memories are deleted, then continuity is lost, identity is disrupted. The person who exists after erasure is not the same person who existed before, and this non-sameness is either a problem or a solution depending on perspective, depending on whether identity is valued more than well-being, whether continuity is more important than happiness, whether the integrity of the self matters more than the quality of experience, and the quality of experience is what suffers under traumatic memory, is what is destroyed by intrusive recollections, is what makes life unbearable for those who cannot forget. And if they cannot forget naturally, then perhaps they should be allowed to forget artificially, to choose erasure, to opt for the deletion of memories that are destroying them. And the destruction is real, is measurable, is visible in brain scans, in stress hormone levels, in all the biomarkers of chronic suffering. And the suffering is not ennobling, is not making people stronger, is not serving any purpose except to demonstrate that memory can be prison, can be torture, can be the mechanism through which the past destroys the present. And the destruction is what erasure would prevent, is what deletion would stop, is what forgetting would accomplish. And the accomplishing is mercy, is compassion, is the recognition that some memories are too heavy to carry, are too painful to bear, are incompatible with survival, and survival is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what justifies intervention, justifies technology, justifies the manipulation of memory that would once have been considered impossible, unthinkable, unethical, but is now possible, is now real, is now raising questions that must be answered about who decides, about what criteria are used, about whether erasure should be available to anyone who wants it or only to those whose suffering meets some threshold. And the threshold is where the difficulty lies, is where the ethics become complicated. Because if erasure is available only for the most severe trauma, then who decides what counts as severe enough? And if it is available to anyone, then what prevents its misuse? What prevents people from erasing memories that are uncomfortable but not traumatic, that are painful but not disabling, that are part of the normal range of human experience and should perhaps be integrated rather than deleted? And the integration is what traditional approaches emphasize, is what therapy aims for, is the incorporation of difficult experiences into a coherent narrative, into a sense of self that includes the trauma but is not defined by it. But this incorporation is not always possible, is not always achievable, is requiring resources and time and capacity that not everyone has. And even when it is achieved, it is not always sufficient, is not always eliminating the suffering, is not always making the memory tolerable. And when integration fails, then what? Is the person simply condemned to suffer? Condemned to carry the memory forever? Condemned to be destroyed by an experience that happened once but is replaying endlessly? And the endless is what memory makes possible, is the way that a single event can become a lifetime of suffering. And if that suffering can be prevented, can be eliminated, can be stopped through the deletion of memory, then why should it not be? What principle is more important than the relief of suffering? What value trumps the well-being of the person who is being destroyed by memory? And the destruction is not metaphorical, is literal, is the disintegration of functioning, of relationships, of the capacity to live. And if erasure can prevent this disintegration, then perhaps it should be used. Perhaps it should be offered. Perhaps it should be normalized rather than stigmatized. But the stigma is real, is coming from multiple directions, from those who believe that memory is essential to identity and should not be tampered with, from those who worry about slippery slopes and unintended consequences, from those who insist that suffering has meaning and should be endured rather than erased. And the meaning is what is most disputed, is what is most questioned. Because the claim that suffering has meaning is easy to make from a position of safety, from a position of not suffering, from a position of having integrated one's own traumas, or never having experienced trauma severe enough to be unintegrable. But for those who are suffering, for those who are being destroyed, the meaning is not visible, is not accessible, is not providing any comfort or purpose or reason to continue. And the continue is what is in question, is what is at stake, is why erasure might be necessary, might be ethical, might be the right choice. Despite all the concerns about identity and continuity and the sanctity of memory, because memory is not sacred, is not inherently valuable, is only valuable insofar as it serves life. And when it does not serve life, when it destroys life, when it makes life unbearable, then its value is negative, is harmful, is justifying intervention. And intervention is what erasure is the technological manipulation of memory for therapeutic purposes. And the therapeutic is what justifies it, is what makes it ethical, is the goal of reducing suffering, of improving functioning, of making life livable for those for whom it is currently unlivable. And the unlivable is the condition that justifies extreme measures, that justifies technologies that would otherwise be considered too risky, too invasive, too potentially harmful, because the harm of doing nothing is greater than the harm of erasure, is greater than the risk of identity disruption, is greater than any abstract concern about the sanctity of memory. And the sanctity is the appeal to tradition, is the insistence that things should be done the way they have always been done, that memory should not be manipulated, that the past should be accepted rather than edited. But this traditionalism is not serving those who are suffering, is not helping those who are being destroyed, is only protecting an ideal, a concept, a belief that memory is essential to being human. And maybe it is, maybe memory is what makes humans human, but maybe humans would be better off with less memory, with more forgetting, with the capacity to let go of experiences that serve no purpose except to create suffering. And the capacity is what technology is providing, is what erasure makes possible, is the choice to forget, to let go, to be free from the past, and the freedom is what matters, is what should be prioritized, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but perhaps obligatory, perhaps something that should be offered, should be encouraged, should be made available to all who need it, because the need is great, is widespread, is affecting millions who are living with memories they cannot escape, cannot integrate, cannot survive. And the survival is what is at stake, is what makes this an urgent question. Not an abstract philosophical puzzle, but a practical ethical dilemma with real consequences for real people who are suffering now, who need relief now, who cannot wait for therapy to work or for time to heal or for meaning to emerge from their trauma. Because for many, the meaning never emerges. The healing never happens. The suffering never ends, except through death or erasure. And if erasure can prevent death, then it is the ethical choice, is the compassionate choice, is the choice that prioritizes the person over the principle, the individual over the ideal, the actual suffering over the abstract concern. And the concern about identity is legitimate, is real, is raising important questions about what continuity means and whether it can be preserved through erasure. But these questions are secondary to the question of survival, are less urgent than the question of whether the person can continue living with the memory. And if they cannot, then the questions about identity become moot, become irrelevant, because identity requires existence, and existence requires tolerability, and tolerability requires that memory not be destroying the person. And if it is destroying the person, then erasure is justified, is necessary, is the intervention that should be used. And the using is not a failure of courage or resilience or meaning-making, is not an admission of weakness, is not a refusal to integrate or endure, is simply the recognition that some experiences are too much, are beyond what can be borne, are incompatible with living. And when living is the goal, then erasure is the means, is the technology that makes it possible, is the mercy that medicine can provide. And the providing is ethics, is compassion, is the appropriate response to suffering that is otherwise unrelievable. And the unrelievable is what makes memory torture in some cases, is what makes the past a prison, is what makes forgetting not a failure, but a necessity, not a loss, but a gain, not the destruction of identity, but its salvation, because identity requires a living person, and living requires that trauma not be replaying constantly, not be fragmenting consciousness, not be making every moment unbearable. And the unbearable is what memory makes possible, is what remembering produces, is the cost of consciousness that includes memory. And maybe some things should not be remembered, should not be preserved, should not be allowed to continue shaping experience. And the shaping is what memory does, is how the past influences the present. And if that influence is destructive, then it should be stopped, should be interrupted, should be erased. And the erasing is what technology now allows, is what ethics should permit, is what compassion demands. Because the alternative is continued suffering, is the ongoing destruction of people by their own memories, is the insistence that they carry burdens that no one should have to carry, that serve no purpose, that make no meaning, that produce only pain, and the pain is enough, is sufficient reason to intervene, is justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the liberation from memory that is prison, that is torture. That is the mechanism through which trauma becomes permanent. And the permanent is what should be ended, is what technology can end, is what ethics should permit ending. Because memory is not sacred, identity is not absolute, continuity is not more important than survival, and survival is what erasure makes possible, is what forgetting provides, is what some people need in order to live. And the living is what matters, is what should be protected, is what justifies the technology, justifies the intervention, justifies the choice to erase, to forget, to let go of the past, to be freed from memory, to be given the mercy of amnesia. And the mercy is real, is powerful, is the gift of forgetting what should never have happened, what should never have been remembered, what should never have been allowed to destroy a life. And the destruction is what erasure prevents, is what forgetting stops, is what makes the ethics clear, makes the choice obvious, makes the answer yes. Some memories should be erased, should be deleted, should be forgotten, because memory is not always gift, is sometimes curse, is sometimes the thing that destroys rather than preserves, that harms rather than helps, that makes life unbearable rather than meaningful. And when memory is cursed, then erasure is cure, is treatment, is the ethical response to suffering that has no other solution. And the solution is forgetting, is amnesia, is the right to oblivion, is the choice to let the past go, to be freed from its weight, to live without the burden of memories that serve no purpose except to create pain. And the pain is enough, is reason enough, is justification enough for erasure, for deletion, for the technology that makes forgetting possible, that makes mercy achievable, that makes liberation from memory real. And the real is what matters, is what should guide ethics, is what should determine whether erasure is used. And the determination is clear, is obvious, is yes, for those who need it, for those who are suffering, for those whose memories are destroying them. Erasure should be available, should be offered, should be used, because memory is not sacred, suffering is not meaningful. The past is not worth preserving when it destroys the present, and the present is all there is all that matters, is what should be protected, even if protection requires forgetting, even if survival requires erasure, even if living requires the deletion of memory, because living is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes erasure not just permissible, but necessary, not just acceptable, but obligatory, not just an option, but the right choice, the ethical choice, the compassionate choice, the choice that prioritizes people over principles, individuals over ideals, actual lives over abstract concerns. And the concerns are real, but are secondary, are less important than the suffering, less urgent than the need, less compelling than the possibility of relief. And the relief is what erasure provides, is what forgetting offers, is what amnesia delivers. And the delivery is mercy, is compassion, is ethics in action, is the appropriate response to suffering that can be prevented, to pain that can be stopped, to memories that can be erased, and should be erased, and will be erased, because the technology exists, because the need is real, because the suffering is unbearable, and the unbearable should not be borne when it can be lifted, when it can be removed, when it can be erased. And the erasing is not loss but gain, not harm but healing, not destruction but salvation, not the end of identity but its continuation. Because identity requires life, and life requires that memory not be weapon, not be prison, not be torture. And when memory is these things, then erasure is the answer, is the solution, is the mercy that makes living possible, and the possible is what matters, is what ethics serves, is what makes forgetting not failure but wisdom, not weakness but strength, not escape but survival. And survival is enough, is sufficient, is the justification for erasure, for deletion, for the right to forget, for the mercy of amnesia, for the ethics of forgetting,